So the big story of the week, which is obviously the lead story, is a report from Bloomberg stating that Sony is working on a PlayStation handheld. And apparently it's not going to be coming for a few years, which is oddly reminiscent of what we're hearing from Microsoft, who's been perfectly clear about its intentions in the portable space. There's a few things about this which may be lost in translation. There's talk that it's going to support PlayStation 5 games. We'll talk about that in a moment. But John, this is happening, isn't it? It's just a matter of time.
I would say so. The thing is the handheld space has changed, right? First of all, the Switch has taken over. It's been very successful. Secondly, the last time Sony tried a handheld, we were in the midst of like the smartphone revolution for gaming. That's sort of all settled now, and like smartphone gaming is just a thing, but it's also kind of its own thing, and it kind of coexists, I think. And also, we were at a point where handheld technology simply couldn't really come anywhere near running the kind of stuff you would make for a high-end PC or home console, right? So like that was like Vita 3DS days. So obviously what the Switch did was it allowed Nintendo to consolidate all their resources behind a single device that could do both. And I'd imagine both Sony and Microsoft are looking at ways that they could leverage a similar sort of, design where they essentially create a single game and then it can run on both hardware. How feasible this is all going to be, how it's all going to shake out, there's a lot of questions there, especially if they're going for high-end graphics. But then you see something like what Microsoft's already doing with Series S, and knowing how scalable modern games are, you kind of see how it could work. But what's interesting about this is we actually heard about this handheld some months ago from a couple sources specifically. So we're not in the business of leaking things, but it's interesting that this finally sort of started to make its rounds, because it just sort of confirmed what we had seen and heard off the record about this existing, which is cool. So to me, this sort of just strengthens the notion that, they're very much working on something. And this article makes it seem like it's even further out than I actually thought based on that. So I'm not sure where it's going. I think there's like prototype stuff out there, possibly. There's still a lot of questions for this, but it does feel like this future of offering a handheld and a home console option is very likely at this point.
Mm-hmm. We've got this question from SJ33 in brackets, Jake. Hi, Jake.
Hi, Jake.
Hi. And I'll come to you, Alex, directly after the question. Hi, all. That Sony handheld seems too good to be true. How are they going to get a handheld with a low enough TDP to play PS5 games within that time frame, given they're still not able to make a truly slim PS5 console? Assuming this is not another silly streaming thing, this is going to have to play PS5 games natively with the expected compatibility and performance. It's not like PC handhelds, where performance optimization can be left to the end user. Will we see special handheld modes added along with a white list of compatible titles, or am I underestimating AMD's ability to shrink the PlayStation 5 silicon? You're not underestimating AMD's ability to shrink the PlayStation 5 silicon. There's no way a device that chews through 200 watts right now is going to suddenly do the same results at 20 watts a couple of years down the road. It's just not happening. So what we're sort of seeing in that story about the ability to run PlayStation 5 games, it's not going to happen. What I see happening is very much what John suggests, which is basically scalability and almost like the Switch model. We're already seeing scaling up with PS5 Pro. There's absolutely no reason why you couldn't scale down. And if you think about the architectural leanings of the PS5 Pro and where things are heading in future console designs, we're going to see it with Switch 2, basically better ray tracing, machine learning capabilities. It'll be the same here. I don't know what you think about all of this, Alex, but I'm quite excited about the idea of a PlayStation handheld, because historically they've just made really good ones. But curious what you think about this one.
Yeah, I think it's a different situation than what Microsoft will have with its handheld, because Microsoft, other than leaning into the whole PC mentality thing, where maybe Jake mentions this too, like you can configure the options in a game based upon a PC version to maybe make it run on a low powered device. And that can be like semi-successful depending upon the device. But Microsoft also has the ability, depending upon how they do it, to lean into Xbox Series S profiles for games, which typically run at like, depending on the game, 720p to 1080p resolution or even lower, obviously. Typically run at half the frame rate, typically do not have the ray tracing options that are there on the Series X, if they are there. And they can technically lean into those profiles for a handheld for backwards compatibility purposes. I don't know if they're going to do that, but Sony never had an Xbox Series S, which forced developers to make these low-end profiles for games. And in which case, if they bring out a handheld, I think it would be almost like a Sony VR2, where it would have to have its own versions of games after the fact, after it came out, or via patches after it came out, when it came into existence. So it'd be like a new lower end PS5 in that aspect, that is mobile, and it doesn't have the full BC catalog, maybe other than PS4 games. But like the original PS5 titles and a lot of those other things that didn't have PS4 games, they would either be forced into have, like, I don't know. I don't think they couldn't do it like Microsoft could potentially do it. And I think that it depends upon the consumer there, how much you care about that. But, I think a lot of people would be pretty happy even if they didn't get all the PS5 titles, if they got like PS4 BC on it, backwards compatibility. I think that would still be an incredible, it would look incredible. PS4 games still look great. So, I think that's where it could be.
Absolutely. Another area that I was thinking of was like if they could just make the quintessential PlayStation experience in a handheld, where you mentioned PS4 backwards compatibility. Not saying they'll do this, but what if they push this idea of like, yeah, this is a handheld. We've got PS1, PS2, PSP. We've got Vita. We've got PS3 maybe, PS4, all this stuff can be played on this handheld. And, obviously they'd have to set up the whole digital storefront thing and go that way because you couldn't use original media. But I think it would be cool if they could actually do a device that was capable of all those different types of software, all that different type of software, in addition to running sort of like special PS5 versions of games. Because like you say, obviously I don't think they could just have it natively run PS5 games as they are. Just no way.
There's not really any point either. I mean, let's say you've got a handheld, 7-8 inch screen, right? Why do you need it outputting 4K? Right. 7 to 8 inch screen. So it's just sort of like basic logic that says that you're not going to be running native PlayStation 5 games on it from a technological perspective. And also, if you're thinking about battery life, let's run a 4K game on a handheld under battery. It's kind of nuts. So it's a bit sort of weird to see that coming into the conversation at all in that original report. But in terms of running native PlayStation 5 code, sure, right? It will, you'd think it would still have a Radeon GPU. It would still have x86 processor cores. That would kind of make sense. Although that said, if it's going to be quote unquote bespoke, similar to what we saw with PlayStation Vita, there's no reason why they couldn't move to ARM if that is the best CPU choice for the platform. So I mean, PlayStation 4 compatibility, that would require x86, and that kind of makes a bit more sense, I think, to run those games natively because they were targeting a 1080p screen at the time. And there's no reason why that wouldn't map quite nicely onto like an 8-inch screen, similar to what the PlayStation Portal is doing. It's an 8-inch 1080p screen. The compatibility side of things, though, I'm just trying to think of how that would work. 1.6 gigahertz CPU, that's eminently doable on a handheld. 800 megahertz GPU, eminently doable on a handheld. 18 compute units, I'd say probably, if this is a few years out, eminently doable on a handheld. So yeah, I mean, PlayStation 4 is possible. It's just kind of like the power and the bandwidth that's a bit more problematic there. But I'd say it's doable based on what we're seeing with the recent AMD APUs. So yeah, that's quite interesting. But I noticed that, all of these machines, well, the Microsoft and the Sony ones specifically, are a few years out. And that's really interesting language because in theory, certainly if you're Microsoft, for example, Valve is making headway with the Steam Deck. They're selling millions of units there now, not many, many millions, but millions. And I'm surprised that they're not looking to do something sooner, because I can just see Valve gaining more of a foothold, both in terms of handhelds and basically laying the groundwork for a Steam console if they wanted to get one out. So the time lag there is interesting, and I can only assume that they've done the maths in terms of future process nodes and Radeon GPUs, and they've come to the conclusion that to provide a meaningful upgrade over what Steam Deck is doing, and I mean meaningful, then you're going to have to wait that long. I mean, I'm looking at the moment. I don't really think you can see it here. Actually, it's in the background here. There we go. This is a little mini PC that I've got, B-Link SER9, which is using the Strix Point AMD APU. That thing's a monster. It's got 12 CPU cores, an MPU. I think it's got 16 compute units, but it's still, yes, it's a lot faster than the Steam Deck, but it's not twice as fast, so right. That's just how, we're seeing iterative bumps upon iterative bumps, not sort of game-changing performance changes. So yeah, we are probably some years out before we can actually see a meaningful upgrade over Steam Deck, which is probably why we're waiting years for these handhelds to come along. But even so.
One other thing, Rich, is we're talking about this whole PS5 situation, but let's say this thing comes out 3 or 4 years from now, that's pretty much end of life for PS5.
Yeah.
Right?
And we know that we're going to be seeing a complete, radical overhaul in terms of architecture, simply to make an affordable device at that point.
Right.
There's a lot of talk about UDNA, which is machine learning and GPU compute coming together in I assume some sort of unified architecture. Which possibly makes sense for a console at that point. But yes, you're quite right. I would expect a handheld to be based on the newer architectural designs, simply to make those new games compatible with the handheld, which I think is kind of required at that point. Absolutely. Yeah. Any other points to raise about this handheld? Obviously, it's speculative, but we do think it's happening. And we now know from this Bloomberg report, assuming it checks out, that it is some years away. But I do like the idea, what you were saying, John, about some sort of PlayStation universe, so to speak, on a handheld. Yeah. But there's no reason why that couldn't apply to the whole ecosystem.
They could have done that at any point. Just, whatever. Yeah. They don't really seem that interested in it, but I still think it would be a very strong selling point for them.
The issue is always going to be the PlayStation 3.
It's always the PS3. Gosh darn it.
The triple's just too powerful.
It was too powerful. The cell, man. They could put a cell in there, though. Maybe it's time to bring it back.
Oh, my goodness, no.
Okay, so PlayStation handheld.
One last thing about that, though. What do you all think about the current state of handheld sizes?
Oh wow!
Because I feel like getting bigger.
They're already huge and they're getting bigger.
Yes.
They make the Atari Lynx look dainty, quite frankly.
Yeah, really.
It's just shocking at this point. And I'm wondering, do y'all miss the smaller ones, the ones that you could easily toss in a bag? Because I've been playing with my original, the PSP lately, and it's been awesome again. It's so small and lightweight, and there's just something about it that just feels really great and portable in a way that a Steam Deck or the Switch absolutely do not. You know what I mean?
It's not the thing where you can with a Game Boy Advance SP where you can literally put it in a back pocket. of a pant.
Exactly.
Nothing like that. I mean, I would love that, but it just doesn't fit with like the way people are doing
agree.
these things anymore, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, there was news this week that Tencent, of all people, is putting out a handheld.
Right.
Except it's got an 11-inch 3D screen.
Oh no!
Yeah, it's based on it's based on an Intel chipset, a massive 11-inch display, even larger than the Legion Go, which is already quite colossal.
We're talking about
I think the problem is that the way things are going in terms of silicon, if you want to get sort of like the best balance of price and performance, you have to push the silicon harder, which means you need to feed it more power, which means you need a bigger display, which a bigger form factor rather, which means you get a bigger display and a larger handheld. Yeah, and I think even when the Switch came along, it was slightly larger than was kind of expected, and the new Switch seemingly is going to be larger still.
Well,
So
Rich, if you're worried about power consumption and stuff, maybe electric cars are becoming popular. Like, let's say you just use like an electric car charger for your handheld. It's all good.
It's mobile at
sure
that point, right? It's got wheels.
I'm not sure I need 7 kilowatts going into my handheld. That's what my power. That would be funny though.
Just like clonk it onto the back there, and you're like, yeah, we're good now.
That'd be awesome, especially as mine is basically in the parking area, so I'd have to be gaming, literally sitting outside my house.
There are worse things.